Welcome. This morning, I'm joined by Marc Hedrick, MD, President and Chief Executive Officer of Plus Therapeutics. Marc, it's a pleasure. How are you?
Hey, Michael. I'm great. Thanks. Good to talk to you.
Let's get started and dive right into it. Can you give us a high-level overview of Plus Therapeutics? It's our first time having you on our segment. What does the company do? What details can you give us?
We're a public biotechnology company. So we develop targeted precision radiotherapeutics that overwhelm and kill tumors and spare the normal tissues, organs, and cells in the body. Our lead drug is being developed for a variety of different kinds of cancers, specifically in the brain and the nervous system. And they're supported by the NIH or the National Cancer Institutes. And then finally, we have a few other drugs that are also being developed for a variety of other solid organ cancers.
Outstanding. Okay, let's zoom in on that a little bit and get into the details. Plus recently announced a partnership with Metadata to leverage its synthetic control arm solution in a planned phase 2 trial of rhenium-186 nanoliposome. What can you explain about this partnership in more detail? What does it mean for Plus Therapeutics specifically, but why is it so significant in the space as well?
We believe this partnership with Metadata can really help us get our drug approved faster and for less money, which is all great for shareholders, and then ultimately help patients get the drug or the therapy sooner than they otherwise could. But let me give you a little background on Metadata and the synthetic control arm, because it's a very new and innovative thing. So first of all, the rationale behind the synthetic control arm. If you look at the fundamental, limiting, monumental problem in cancer treatment, it's not the scientific development of these drugs. There's a lot of drugs out there, but it's really the clinical testing. And that clinical testing is done to determine if the drug is safe and effective, and then ultimately get regulatory approval and reimbursement and so forth. So Metadata uses artificial intelligence and big data, and they take these approaches to transform what I would call a clinical logjam in getting these cancers through preclinical and then through the clinical development process and into patients. So what Metadata has done is they've compiled over 23,000 clinical trials, which represents 10 million patients, and they've done this over 10 years. So this database can be used to develop a comparator or control patient data set to use as a comparator arm for clinical trials. So that data can all be mined and then used in a clinical control patient data set. So that approach, Michael, allows us to speed trial enrollment, lower the trial cost, and it helps enable more ethically designed clinical trials to help patients. So, for us, this partnership with Metadata, we think can really help get our drug approved faster, for less money, and to help patients sooner than we otherwise could.
Outstanding. Okay, let's dive into that a little bit more too and get some details. Can you provide background on why SCAs are so valuable in the instance of certain types of cancer, like recurrent brain cancer? How is it going to enhance ongoing clinical trials? What benefits are we going to see out of these SCAs?
It could take about $1 billion to develop a new cancer drug, all the way from initial concept and early preclinical work, all the way to FDA approval. Much of that cost is not so much in the early preclinical rodent work or petri dish work. It's in the clinical trials, which are very, very expensive. And for example, in each enrolled patient in a clinical trial for brain cancer, a space that we live and work in, that can cost well over $100,000 per patient to the company to enroll that patient into the trial. And by extension, that cost rolls right over into shareholders. So furthermore, besides just sort of the core economic cost of each patient required to bring a drug through to market, every day that the company's not selling its drug, getting its drug approved, selling it, and providing a return to shareholders on its equity is a missed opportunity. So time and efficiency of action equates to unrealized cash flow and earnings. So logically, it follows that if we can use something, and it can be anything, but in this case, a synthetic control arm, in an approval trial to lower the need to enroll patients and compress the time frame needed to complete the clinical trial, that could translate into literally tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions of dollars. That's kind of, on one hand, it's helping enabling the big ticket item registrational trial for the company, but also even before the drug is ready for these big trials, the approval registrational trial, a synthetic control arm can mitigate the opportunity cost by creating a control arm for a single-armed early stage phase 1 or phase 2 trial. So in other words, when you're early on, you're trying to get a feel for whether a drug is safe and whether there's some signal of efficacy. That's a single arm trial. You can actually use a synthetic control arm to compare a group of patients exactly to the ones that you enrolled in your phase 1 trial and get sort of an equivalent data set for comparison. So that better informs what we call these go, no-go decisions to move a drug to a bigger, more expensive trial. And so you can weed out drugs that perhaps aren't so great before you get to these really expensive clinical trials that enroll hundreds of patients and can cost tens of millions of dollars. So the value proposition here is pretty significant across essentially the whole spectrum of clinical drug development.
Outstanding. Okay, pivoting just a little bit, does Plus Therapeutics have any other big developments our audience should keep an eye out for? The SCAs are a really fascinating topic. We've got a lot of things to already keep our eye on there. But in the next couple of months, Q2 and moving on through the rest of the year, what should the audience have on the horizon to keep an eye out for?
So one thing is we recently began a clinical trial for a type of cancer in the central nervous system that's called leptomeningeal metastases, also called leptomeningeal carcinomatosis. And basically that's when cancer is in the lining of the fluid space around the brain and the spinal cord. So it's a hard term, but it's actually increasingly common. The disease affects about 10 times the number of patients as glioblastoma or brain cancer. It's a growing problem. These patients live literally weeks or months after diagnosis, not months or years. And sadly, from an outcome perspective, a diagnosis of leptomeningeal metastases is just about as bad as it gets in terms of a cancer diagnosis. So we actually treated the first patient in our RESPECT-LM clinical trial just recently at my alma mater, UT Southwestern in Dallas. And anytime you treat the first of anything in cancer care, it's a big deal. And while we can't say a whole lot, we can say that it showed feasibility of this drug in this really important unmet medical need. And we're really optimistic about the opportunity for this treatment ultimately. And over the year, we'll be sharing data from that open label trial as it comes in. Second thing is to follow up on a deal that we announced right at the beginning of the year. We recently licensed a new targeted radiotherapeutic technology that allows us to treat almost any solid cancer of a solid organ in the body. So basically, any place we can isolate the blood flow with a catheter. Any solid organ, we can isolate the blood flow with a catheter by standard interventional radiology means. We can essentially go after that tumor with the radiotherapeutic. And over the year, we'll be talking more about this new acquisition. We intend to advance it as quickly as we can and get it into patients soon, likely for liver cancer first, but we're still in the process of bringing the technology over from academia.
Where can our audience follow Plus to stay updated on the company's pipeline and your progress and everything else you guys have coming down the road?
All that information is aggregated on our website, and anyone can follow us using their preferred vertical, and we'll be happy to push that information out to you in whatever way you prefer.
That's great. Well, we'll certainly pass that on, and we look forward to watching all of these things come down the pike. Marc Hedrick, President and Chief Executive Officer of Plus Therapeutics, thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of this.
You bet. Thanks a ton. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.